liquidation of the Kulaks. Just how idiotic is socialism in practice? Well, sit tight. In 1928, Stalin accelerated the transition to collectivized farms under the assumption that farmers are more productive when they're driven from their ancestral homes, forced to live in dilapidated communes, and denied any ability to profit from their labors. Unsurprisingly, year after year, crop yields plunged. To make matters worse, the majority of food was, again, either exported or prioritized for factory workers, leaving the peasants continuously on the edge of yet another famine. But of course, Stalin had a handy scapegoat in mind: the Kulaks. Now, what is a Kulak? Well, the word originally referred to any somewhat well-off peasant, say a man with an extra dairy cow or something. But soon, a kulak could mean anyone the Soviets decided was a kulak any time they felt like deciding. Were you good at your job? Well, you just might be a kulak. Were you bad at your job? You could be a kulak too. Was your father a kulak? Well, you're definitely a kulak. Did you kill a kulak and take his stuff? Aha, just what a kulak would say. But wait. There's more. In the collective farms, the Soviets promoted a theory called Lysenkoism. This was the Marxist idea that crops, just like people, grow best when they are planted in tightly packed collectives. Never mind, this absurd notion flew in the face of thousands of years of agricultural know-how. This is what the collective farmers were forced to do. The seeds, planted too close to one another, cannibalized each other's nutrients and failed to take root. In 1932, a scant 10 years after the last one, another famine of biblical proportions swept through Russia. To meet this crisis, Stalin ordered grain and livestock pillaged from Ukraine, under the justification that the Ukrainians were not genuinely enthusiastic about socialism and could therefore be deprioritized, in yet another chilling euphemism. From 1932 to 1933, this deprioritization resulted in the deaths of between 7 and 10 million Ukrainians. For perspective, that number is higher than the total number of Jews killed in the Holocaust. However, because the Ukrainians merely starved to death, or perhaps because all this happened within Soviet borders, the Holodomor, as it became known, has not acquired quite the same odium of that other, far more infamous genocide. And genocide is plainly what it was. Like Lenin, Stalin pointedly refused all international relief efforts and, unlike Lenin, never reneged on it. In his view, the Ukrainians were due for a correction. He had not forgotten that many Ukrainians had supported the whites during the Civil War, and his diabolic paranoia prevented him from looking past the mildest reports of Ukrainian nationalism. Now, you might think that Stalin had better luck turning Russian industry around, and you'd be right, actually. But how? Remember, all those skilled Russian workers or engineers had either been slain or driven into exile. So what was Stalin's solution? Well, under the greatest of secrecy, the Soviets began hiring ringers. That is, industrial experts from the West to design and guide the construction of numerous large state-of-the-art factories. Once again, capitalism had ridden to the rescue of socialism. I guess somewhere in Marx it says that in case any of this shit doesn't pan out, just cheat and then lie about it. Naturally, great care was taken to conceal from these Westerners the extent of the repression occurring within the wider Soviet Union. They even went so far as to construct artificial towns called Potemkin villages, named after one of Kathy's old lovers, intended to deceive Western visitors into believing the Soviet Union was some kind of fantastical Garden of Eden. It sounds laughable until you realize that much of the time it worked. Famously, Walter Duranty of the New York Times won the Pulitzer for his reporting on the Soviet Union, in which he claimed, among other things, that the Ukrainian famine was a scare story instigated by troublesome British and American journalists. This was in 1933, and again, his work was printed in the New York Times.
The failing New York Times, which is like so bad.